Imagine a figure who, for millennia, has been more than just a name, an archetype of perfection, radiance, and absolute divinely bestowed authority. We speak of Lucifer, whom ancient traditions describe as the light bringer, the morning star, the brightest luminary among the host of heavenly beings. His image in the collective consciousness embodies flawless intellect, an architect of harmony whose very presence was a source of light and inspiration for all creation. He was the pinnacle of creation, the apex of the hierarchy, the confidant of the Creator, capable of perceiving the divine plan in its entirety and executing it with absolute precision. His wisdom was undeniable, his beauty dazzling, his voice so convincing that every word seemed like the ultimate truth. How you have fallen from heaven, O morning star, son of the dawn, cries the prophet in ancient texts, and in these words one hears not only sorrow, but also an echo of past greatness, a reminder of who he was before his fall, a zenith of creative energy, purity, and light. Legions of beings surrounded him, gazing upon him with reverence, seeing him as a conduit of divine will, a standard to which all aspired. He was not merely one among many. He was the chosen one, granted the right and ability to shape reality, maintain order, and illuminate the path. His reputation was impeccable, his authority absolute. It seemed nothing could shake his position or cast a shadow upon his radiant form. He was the embodiment of order and beauty, a mirror reflecting the grandeur of the divine plan. His actions were always precise, his decisions flawless, and every movement seemed to add harmony to the cosmic dance of existence. He was the one who carried the torch of reason, illuminating the most hidden corners of the cosmos, and his presence guaranteed stability and progress. Yet behind this dazzling facade of perfection lay a deep, destructive fissure that ran through the very core of his being. The one called to bring light and uphold harmony proved capable of unthinkable cruelty, committing an act that shook the foundations of creation and forever altered his destiny. This was not an emotional decision made in the heat of battle or the despair of defeat. On the contrary, at the peak of his triumph, at the zenith of his glory, when universal acclaim and boundless trust were his inherent right, Lucifer performed a deed that exposed his true, dark essence. He did not merely express disagreement with the higher will. He cynically used his gift of persuasion, his incredible charisma, and his profound knowledge of the cosmic order to sow seeds of doubt and discord among those he was meant to protect and lead. He deliberately twisted the truth, presenting divine order as tyranny and free will as a privilege unfairly withheld. His words, once light-bearing, turned into a poison corroding faith and loyalty. He didn't just speak, he manipulated minds, promising illusory freedom in exchange for absolute subservience to himself. Under his influence, the radiant legions, once devoted and loyal, transformed into a rebel army, ready to shatter the foundations of creation for his own ambitions. This was an act of cold, calculated rebellion dictated by a pride that proved stronger than light and love. He did not hesitate, nor did he doubt his choice. Though he was perfectly aware of the catastrophic consequences his decision would bring, he consciously chose the path of destruction, knowing it would unleash chaos, suffering, and division, the echoes of which still resonate in history and mythology. His act was not merely defiance, but a profound contempt for the established order and for those who followed it. He saw weakness in reverence, naivety in trust, and sought to prove his superiority at any cost, even at the cost of a cosmic catastrophe. He didn't just rebel, he exploded the very fabric of existence from within. How could this be? How could such polar, mutually exclusive principles coexist within the same being? Absolute beauty and bottomless darkness, a drive for light and a thirst for destruction, flawless intellect and blind, all-consuming pride. What was the subtle, invisible catalyst that initiated this chain of irreversible changes? What transformed the light bringer into what we now know as the fallen angel, a symbol of evil and defiance? This is not merely a question of a biblical narrative or a mythological character confined to the pages of ancient folios. It is a profound psychological inquiry into the nature of transformation, into how inner struggle, ambition, and a distorted perception of one's own greatness can alter even the most perfect creation beyond recognition. We will attempt to understand what happens when pride becomes not just a sin, but a powerful, all-consuming force capable of engulfing not only the world around it, but the very soul, turning radiance into shadow and creation into destruction. And perhaps in this story of a fall, we will find answers to questions about our own nature, about the fragility of the balance between light and darkness within each of us, and how easily even the noblest intentions can be perverted. To comprehend this transformation, one must delve into the very fabric of the world where he existed. Imagine not merely a hierarchy, but a grand, living, breathing symphony, where every note, every instrument was tuned to absolute harmony. This was a universe built upon principles of flawless perfection, pure reflection, and unconditional devotion to the Creator. There was no room for nuances, for imprecision, or for subjective interpretation. Success was measured not by personal ambition or uniqueness, but by the degree of alignment with the divine plan, by the purity with which one could transmit His will. The highest virtue was to be a perfect mirror, without a single blemish, flawlessly reflecting the light of the source, serving as a conduit for His boundless energy. Any deviation, any individuality not aligned with the general course was considered not merely an error, but a dissonance, a threat to the integrity of this entire cosmic architecture. In this world where everyone was part of a grand yet strictly regulated dance of existence, Lucifer was not just a soloist, he was a virtuoso, a conductor, a choreographer, the most brilliant and precise reflection of primordial light. His position was unique. He was not only an executor, but also an interpreter, one who gave form to abstract ideas, embodying them into tangible reality. He was expected not just to be impeccable, but to show initiative within given parameters, to possess a creative capacity that would only multiply the grandeur of the original source. The pressure to be the standard, to be the flawless archetype was colossal, yet it was also the source of his unprecedented standing. In this system, where every gaze was directed upward towards the ideal, Lucifer was the one in whom this ideal found its most complete and perfect expression, a focal point for all who sought harmony. It was in this environment that his primary gift transformed into his most potent weapon, unparalleled throughout creation. This was his capacity for absolute, dazzling perfection in everything he did, in intellect, in beauty, in the power of persuasion. He was able not just to understand, but to perceive the divine plan down to the minutest detail, then to embody it with such precision and grace that it inspired awe and reverence in all who surrounded him. If the Creator was the grand architect, then Lucifer was his chief engineer and decorator, capable not only of laying the foundations of creation, but also of filling every corner of existence with light, order, and meaning. Imagine how, at his word, the celestial spheres would begin to revolve in perfect rhythm, how at his thought new constellations would ignite in distant galaxies, or how with a mere glance he could quell nascent chaos, transforming it from a thread into another note in the universal symphony. His most significant action during that period was not a single event, but rather his systemic presence as a living embodiment of order and harmony. When there was a need to create new worlds, new life forms, new laws, it was Lucifer who could take disparate elements and weave them into a unified, harmonious whole, breathing a spark of life into them and subjecting them to the higher will. He was a master of ordering, an organizer of cosmic space whose activity was indistinguishable from the very process of creation. His influence was so pervasive that his decisions, his words, were perceived as a direct continuation of divine will, as undeniable truth, for every act of his merely amplified and underscored the grandeur of the divine plan. He was the one who transformed potential into reality, chaos into cosmos, and his work was flawless, for it was a reflection of the inherent perfection of creation itself. But behind this radiant facade of absolute success and universal veneration lay a deep, corrosive, internal cost, one not obvious to anyone, not even to himself. In a world where flawless reflection was the highest virtue and any unauthorized manifestation of individuality was a weakness, Lucifer, unbeknownst to himself, began to lose himself in this flawlessness. He was such a perfect mirror that he gradually forgot he merely reflected light, rather than being its source. The universal admiration he commanded was directed not so much at him as a person, but at the impeccability he embodied, the ideal he represented. And the more he excelled in this role, the stronger grew his inner sense of his own exceptionalism, his indispensability. He was the pinnacle of creation, the apex of the hierarchy. And this position, instead of being a burden of service, gradually transformed into the burden of his own grandeur. There was no one for him to surpass, no one to compete with, and in this absolute superiority, a dangerous, all-consuming solitude began to brew. This was not the kind of loneliness that causes longing, but one that fosters a sense of self-sufficiency, the feeling that you are the only one capable of such a level of perfection. The pride spoken of in ancient texts was not mere arrogance in the usual sense, but rather a deeply ingrained conviction of his own self-sufficiency. Believing his light was his own, not a gift, he was so absorbed in his function, his perfection, that he began to perceive himself not as part of a whole, but as the whole itself, as a self-sufficient center of being. This constant demand upon himself to be perfect, to be first, to be unique, created a subtle, barely perceptible fissure in his essence. He did not experience fear or guilt in the usual sense, as his actions were always impeccable within his role. Rather, it was an existential void he tried to fill by asserting his superiority over everything, even over the very plan he was meant only to reflect. This was not a suppressed conscience, but rather the absence of a need for it when you consider yourself the standard. When your internal coordinate system reorients itself so that you become your own judge and measure. He did not pay with suffering, he paid with the awareness of his own divinity, which gradually replaced the true divinity to which he was connected. And this substitution, this quiet whisper of self-deification, became the invisible catalyst that slowly but surely led him to the edge of the abyss, to a point where his own radiance blinded him so completely that he ceased to see the source of light, mistaking his reflection for truth. It was into this seemingly unshakable order, this flawless symphony of existence, that a dissonance erupted whose nature was utterly alien to everything Lucifer knew and governed. This was an event that could not be integrated into his refined system of coordinates without violating its fundamental principles. At the moment when creation seemed to have reached the peak of its splendor, when every element was in its place and the cosmic dance was performed with perfect grace, the Creator unveiled a new form of life, beings fashioned from dust, yet endowed with a unique spark, the capacity for free will, and most astonishingly imbued with the divine image. They were called humans. This was not just another creation, not a new galaxy or constellation that Lucifer could simply order and integrate into the existing harmony. Humans were different. They were not flawless mirrors. They were not perfect executors. Within them resided an internal contradiction, a drive for development through mistakes, a potential for both fall and elevation that was incomprehensible and alien to a world of absolute perfection. And so, in the face of this new, unpredictable element, a command was issued that became for Lucifer not merely a challenge, but a direct insult to his very self, to his carefully constructed notion of his own grandeur. He, the pinnacle of creation, the most brilliant reflection of the divine plan, was commanded to bow down before these new imperfect beings. At this moment, his inner world, previously seemingly unbreakable, began to crack. Everything he considered true, everything he had built, all his methods of ordering and perfecting, proved powerless before this new, incomprehensible act of will. How could he bow down to something that, by his standards, was inferior? How could he accept what did not conform to perfection? This was not merely a breach of hierarchy, it was an assault on his very identity. He was created to be first, to be perfection, and now he was asked to submit to what he perceived as chaos, a step backward in the evolution of existence. His pride, which until then had been a whisper, now spoke aloud, drowning out all other thoughts. He could not understand the Creator's motives, could not comprehend the idea of value in imperfection or the grandeur of free will, which allowed for development not by a predetermined template, but through one's own path. His perfection, his flawlessness, which had once been his strength, now became his prison, preventing him from accepting otherness, from seeing value in anything that did not conform to his own standards. He was so captivated by his own reflection that he could not recognize that the source of light might have other, equally important forms of manifestation. This external challenge, this command to humble himself before humanity, triggered a profound internal crisis within him. Lucifer, accustomed to unquestioning authority and veneration, found himself facing a dilemma his refined intellect could not resolve within his existing paradigms. His former methods, ordering, systematizing, perfecting, were useless. He could not order human free will, nor could he perfect its imperfection without destroying its very essence. He could not accept that the divine plan might include something that was not an ideal reflection, something that developed not according to a strict algorithm, but sometimes through errors and suffering. Within his consciousness, which always strove for absolute logic and harmony, a paradox arose. If he was perfect, how could something exist that surpassed him in significance in the Creator's eyes? This contradiction tore him apart from within. He began to see the command not as a manifestation of wisdom, but of injustice, even tyranny. His own impeccability, which he had so cherished, became an instrument of his self-deception. He reasoned, if I am the pinnacle of creation, if I am the most brilliant reflection of the divine, then any demand that diminishes my role must be erroneous. He began to rewrite the rules of creation in his mind, placing himself at the center, transforming his exceptionalism into a right to sole dominion. He saw himself not merely as a reflection, but as the only true embodiment of the plan, and everything else is merely a misunderstanding that required correction. The moment that became his enlightenment, though in reality it was a blinding, arrived when he finally convinced himself of his own righteousness. This was not a sudden revelation, but rather the culmination of a long process of self-deification. He looked upon humanity, this unfinished project, and saw in them not potential, but weakness. He looked upon the Creator and saw not wisdom, but despotism that demanded blind obedience. And then he understood true freedom lies not in service, but in self-determination. True light is not a reflection, but one's own radiance, born of defiance. He convinced himself that his fall would not be a defeat, but an act of supreme will, an act of liberation from the shackles of an unjust order. This distorted truth became his only possible path. He saw in it not pride, but a noble pursuit of independence. He saw in it not egoism, but the defense of his own dignity. He saw in it not destruction, but the reordering of the world according to correct laws. His brilliant intellect, once directed towards creation, was now entirely devoted to constructing a complex but false philosophy, justifying his rebellion. He began to see himself not as fallen, but as one who refused to kneel, who chose a path of vertical ascent, even against the current. He became the architect of his own alternative reality, where his will was law and his ambitions the ultimate goal. And in this blinding, this distorted enlightenment, he saw his true path, a path of opposition, a path of creating his own kingdom, where his radiance would be the sole source of light, requiring no reflection. He ceased to be a mirror, becoming a source, but a source fueled not by love, but by self-deification. Thus his light, once pure, began to wane, transforming into the scorching flame of pride, which ultimately led to his downfall. He ceased to see the purpose. He saw only himself as the purpose, and in this lay the entire tragedy. And so this internal upheaval, this self-deification, could not remain merely a thought confined to Allah's consciousness. It demanded an outlet, demanded action that would forever solidify his new, perverted truth in reality. The bridge was burned not in silence, but in a resounding act of defiance that echoed through all spheres of creation. When the command was issued to bow before the recently created imperfect humans, Lucifer did not merely refuse. He rejected this demand with such fury and contempt that the very space around him seemed to warp. His voice, once a source of harmony, now became an instrument of division, uttering words that sowed seeds of doubt and rebellion among those who moments before had gazed upon him with reverence. He did not merely state his disagreement, he challenged the fundamental foundations of creation, asserting that true greatness could not be bestowed upon those made of dust, those who were imperfect. He argued that his own perfect light surpassed any other design, and that submission to inferiors was not an act of humility, but a humiliation, unworthy of his status. This was a public renunciation of his role, of his destiny to be a flawless reflection. He consciously severed his connection with the primordial source, declaring himself a self-sufficient center whose will was now his only law. In that moment, he did not just refuse a command. He rejected everything that made him Lucifer, the light bringer. He rejected the Creator's trust, the admiration of the legions, the harmony he himself had helped create. This was a sacrifice not of weakness, but of monstrous self-assertion. He lost everything he had, but gained what, in his view, was priceless, absolute, unlimited independence. And this independence, he believed, was the true supreme light. Creation responded immediately. What Lucifer perceived as an act of liberation, the world received as a monstrous dissonance, tearing the fabric of existence. His action caused not merely condemnation, but a shock comparable to the sudden collapse of creation's main pillar. The radiant legions, divided by his persuasive yet poisoned speeches, split. A portion, blinded by his charisma and promises of illusory freedom, followed him, transforming from servants of harmony into a rebel army. The other part, loyal to the original design, was horrified by his apostasy. Immediately, an unparalleled confrontation arose. The heavens, once serene and unified, transformed into a battlefield where light clashed with distorted light. Lucifer, who had always been at the center of universal attention and veneration, now found himself at the center of a storm of his own making. He faced absolute rejection from those who remained loyal to the original order. His name, once spoken with reverence, now became a symbol of apostasy. He felt the full weight of complete ostracism, which was alien to his former existence. Those who loved him now despised him. Those who trusted him now feared him. He found himself in monstrous solitude, surrounded only by the echoes of his own choice and the devotion of those who, like him, had chosen rebellion. But this solitude was not quiet. It was filled with the fury and pain of those who rose against him, and their opposition became a new, constant threat. And yet, even after this irreversible step, the internal war within him did not subside. On the contrary, it only flared up with renewed intensity. Old habits, deeply ingrained in his essence, continued to whisper of order, harmony, and service. His refined intellect, once directed towards creation and ordering, was now constantly forced to justify the destruction he was causing. Every new clash, every manifestation of chaos brought about by his rebellion was not just an external challenge, but an internal trial for him. He had to constantly suppress the parts of himself that yearned for his former flawlessness, for that role where he was part of something greater, not a self-sufficient center. Fear, which he had never known in his former perfect existence, now began to penetrate his consciousness. Fear of defeat, fear of losing control over what he himself had wrought. He struggled with the ghosts of his former glory, with memories of how effortlessly and naturally he had been a conduit of light. These shadows of the past tried to pull him back to his original path, pointing to the destructiveness of his choice. But Lucifer, trapped in his self-declared righteousness, could not retreat. Each time doubt touched him, he only convinced himself more strongly of his exceptionalism, that his path was the only correct one. He devised new, increasingly complex justifications for his actions, turning every victory into proof of his truth, and every defeat into a manifestation of the opponent's injustice or tyranny. He could not allow himself to admit error, for that would mean the collapse of his entire new, self-constructed identity. This internal struggle transformed into an endless cycle of self-justification and self-deception, which only plunged him deeper into isolation, making him a prisoner of his own grandeur. At its core, this was not merely an act of defiance, but a profound transformation of the very principle of his existence. Lucifer, who had been the epitome of flawless reflection of divine light, its perfect conduit and interpreter, now consciously chose to become an independent source of that light. He ceased to be the purest mirror, in which the Creator's will was manifested without distortion, and proclaimed himself his own son, whose rays were meant to illuminate creation according to his own new laws. The principle of service, based on absolute conformity to the original design, was replaced by the principle of absolute self-determination, where his will became the highest law, and his grandeur the sole measure of truth. His former strength lay in the impeccable embodiment of an external, yet higher harmony. Now he sought strength in creating his own independent but tragically distorted reality. This internal upheaval, this metamorphosis from reflection to self-proclaimed source, could not go unnoticed or without consequences. It triggered a chain reaction that tore apart not only the celestial hierarchy, but the very fabric of cosmic balance. Imagine a grand orchestra where every note, every instrument was tuned to a single flawless symphony. Lucifer was not just a soloist in it, but a conductor whose movements set the rhythm and harmony. And suddenly, in the midst of this cosmic melody, he strikes his own dissonant chord, urging the other instruments to follow him, ignoring the score of the great composer. The consequences were immediate and catastrophic. Those legions who had previously looked to him as an exemplar now faced an impossible choice: remain loyal to the original harmony or follow the newly declared source of light, who promised them a different yet illusory freedom. This choice divided them, creating not just a schism but a deep, unhealing wound in the very heart of creation. Those who followed Lucifer began to reflect his new truth, his drive for dominance, his conviction of his own superiority. And where there was once a unified flow of creative energy, now two opposing forces emerged, each believing itself to be in the right. This was not merely a rebellion, but a redefinition of the very nature of power and freedom. From then on, freedom was associated not with harmony and service, but with defiance and self-exaltation. The world, once unified in its pursuit of perfection, was forced to experience conflict, pain, and destruction, born of this fundamental shift. The story of Lucifer is not merely an ancient myth about the fall of a mighty being. It is a profound parable about the nature of selfhood, about the fine line between confidence and arrogance, between the pursuit of perfection and dangerous self-deification. It shows us how even the most outstanding qualities, sharp intellect, dazzling beauty, the gift of persuasion, the capacity for creation, can become instruments of one's own demise if they become detached from the roots of humility and service. In this narrative of the light-bringer who blinded himself with his own radiance, we find a universal lesson. True greatness lies not in being the sole source of light, but in the ability to be a flawless conduit, in the wisdom to see value not only in perfection, but also in the imperfection, fragility, and freedom of another. It invites us to consider what happens when our internal coordinate system becomes so distorted that we begin to mistake our reflection for truth and our own will for the highest law. Within each of us lies this potential to be either the purest mirror or self-proclaimed sun, and our choice determines what symphony we will play in the grand orchestra of existence. What will we choose, humble service to harmony, or a proud yet destructive assertion of our own, albeit dazzling will? We have traced Lucifer's journey from the radiant light bringer to the fallen angel, whose tragedy mirrors the eternal struggle within each of us. This story is not merely an ancient myth, but a powerful reminder of the choice that defines our essence. Thank you for joining us in this deep dive into the nature of ambition and self-determination. If this parable has resonated with you, please subscribe to our channel to not miss new explorations of the great transformations that have shaped our world and human history. And of course, we eagerly await your thoughts and reflections in the comments. What does this story mean to you? What choice, in your opinion, was the most fateful for Lucifer? And what does it say about ourselves? Until next time.